All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast, where today we're going to be talking the NFL, dishing out some playoff predictions before we get things going. We don't typically talk the NFL other than draft season, but we're well in tune with what goes on in the pros, even though we barely dish out analysis. We certainly pay plenty of attention and can offer some great detail as we approach another great playoffs that's potentially in store for us in the NFL. We're going to start with Nick's bracket, and then we'll get to mine with our predictions here. And we'll start with the AFC, Nick. This is kind of a boring conference based on what we have because no one's really giving Denver or Pittsburgh much of a shot. Denver, this is a team that's looked pretty good this year. The offense has gotten better week by week under Bo Nix. Guys like Marvin Mims are really stepping up. Cortland Sutton just had a great game. They play good defense, of course. They lead the NFL in sacks. This is a really good defense as well. Pittsburgh, their offense has really been sputtering over the last 5-6 weeks. And then the Chargers and Texans probably aren't really being taken serious as contenders. Houston, this is a team that really dragged their feet into the playoffs. They've been ravaged by injuries at the wide receiver position. The offensive line's been shaky. CJ Stroud's really not been having the greatest of year due to those circumstances. The Chargers, though, Nick, I would consider the biggest sleepers here in the AFC because it's the top three teams. It's almost a guarantee one of them will represent the conference in New Orleans. The Chargers, though, I think they're quite compelling because, Harbaugh, this is a guy, he's a winner, right? And they probably should have beat Kansas City on the road a couple of weeks ago. They had a doink, though, that went in favor of the Chiefs. A lot of things have went in favor of Kansas City. But Justin Herbert, this guy has played some amazing ball in crunch time. Ladd McConkey finally fully healthy, and he's just been on a tear as of late. This guy ends the year with over 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns. They're going to need other guys that will step up like Quentin Johnston, Will Dissly at tight end, Joshua Palmer. Getting that consistency from the rest of their groups has been an issue for the Chargers. Nick, do you think they have enough to run the table? Or again, it's kind of a 50-50 game against Kansas City. I see you're not going to pull the trigger and pick them to win. And I understand that. This is a team of Kansas City that has, about 2-3 weeks to get ready for this contest. So it's hard to envision them losing it, but the Chargers can beat Kansas City.
It certainly seems like there's good value at the Chargers on this side of the bracket in terms of underdogs. I think the Broncos are also not terrible value. I just think Buffalo's a team of destiny right now that's playing really good football led by Josh Allen, who will probably win the MVP when it's all said and done. The defense for Buffalo is really rounded around this year as well, which has been a big help for this team. They've been playing really good football. The Bills, 157 point differential, positive 157 point differential, 8-0 at home. It's going to be very tough to beat them at home this year, and they have a good shot at having, playing at home pretty much unless they play the Chiefs right now based off of the way they're seeded as the 2 seed. The Chargers 2.5 point favorites right now against the Texans. I think they're a pretty good value in that matchup. Texans seem to always play at Saturday at 3 o'clock on Wild Card weekend. They never seem to have a primetime playoff game for the most part. This is a big opportunity for Justin Herbert and the Chargers, who I'm really high on this team. I think Justin Herbert he's my favorite quarterback in the league. I will defend him to my grave, quite frankly. I think he's a phenomenal quarterback that's playing really good football and dialed in, led by Jim Harbaugh, who's really stepped in and been a phenomenal coach for this team. Herbert, 3,800 yards passing, 23 touchdowns on the season, looking really good. Ladd McConkey turning out to be a phenomenal draft pick for this team with 82 grabs for 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns. They're very efficient. They have 23.6 points per game, 11th in the league, and their defense is also the best defense in terms of points against the Chargers, 17.7 points against, first in the league. I think they certainly beat the Texans here. I think there's a good shot they can hang in with Kansas City. I've been saying this for a while. I feel like Kansas City's mojo is going to run out at some point. That magic has to expire. They've been getting very lucky, getting away with missed field goals, blocked field goals, just late mishaps from their opponents. They really seem to be getting bailed out. That touchdown in the first week against the Ravens, where Likely's toe was barely out of bounds. I mean, it feels like the magic has to run out for the Chiefs at some point. I do have them losing eventually to the Bills, who I think are really going to make a run at the Super Bowl this year, but I could certainly see the Chargers knocking them off as well. This just feels like a year where the Chiefs are going to push their luck to the limit and get caught eventually and lose. Outside of that, though, I like Baltimore. I like Buffalo to win their first-round matchups. Baltimore's playing solid football. The Pittsburgh Steelers, they've lost, I believe, 4 in a row, and they just seem to be really, backing their way into the playoffs. Yeah, 4 in a row. They're not playing great defense. Their offense is certainly not playing good football at all. I'm really concerned about what the Steelers look like this year. I think it's a 1-2 matchup in the conference title game between KC and Buffalo, and I think Buffalo just has that little bit of juice this year to get over the line. They beat them earlier in the year in Buffalo, obviously, and Kansas City is a little bit different, and playoff Mahomes is certainly a different player. But I like the way Buffalo Bills feel right now. I think their defense is firing on all cylinders. The offense has really balanced, a lot of different attacks. James Cook's been really good on the ground. A couple of their backs, their second string and third string backs have been really good for this team as well. I like the Bills to get out of the AFC, which is really a tough, top-heavy conference right now.
Yeah, just to focus back on the Chargers for a second, they do lead the league in scoring defense. They held Kansas City to under 20 points in both matchups. They had issues against Tampa Bay early in December, and then a couple days later against Denver, they were still pretty bad in the first half. But since that second half of that game, the defense has really shown out. Of course, they got guys like Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Derwin James. I mean, they got plenty of great players on that defense that can lead them through the playoffs. And we'll focus on the top three teams. Baltimore, this is a team that has just not been able to really get things done in the playoffs. Their offense just goes incredibly stale, and the matchup's going to be between the two MVP candidates, most likely, in Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Of course, Baltimore blew out Buffalo earlier in the year in Baltimore back in September. Now they're going to have to go to Buffalo, and they'd have to go through Kansas City to get to the Super Bowl. This Ravens team, Nick, great offense, right? Derrick Henry's been a phenomenal addition. Lamar Jackson's having another historic season. But this defense has not been as great as we're accustomed to seeing. This is a team that's really not great against the pass. They're the second to last pass defense in the NFL. The run defense, of course, is incredibly stout, but their ability to defend the pass has not been all that great. And I think Josh Allen and his offense, they've been firing all cylinders like you alluded to. They've really come into full circle with what they've been able to accomplish through the air. James Cook, of course, has given them a nice balance on the ground, and they have a slew of weapons to throw the football to, and Josh Allen just playing at such a high level. It's hard to envision Baltimore making a run this year. And again, Nick, this offense just doesn't seem to accomplish much in the playoffs. Last year, they hosted Kansas City, and I was like, Kansas City's going to win this game, and that's what they did. Defense put on a clinic in Buffalo. Another defense has been a little shaky at times, but Buffalo's built to win shootouts, Nick, and I think that's it's going to be a prime example when they host Baltimore in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment. I talked at length about Kansas City and Buffalo. I really didn't talk about Baltimore. I think it's a tough draw for them, quite frankly, having to go to Buffalo and then potentially Kansas City. Those are two games in a row I just don't see them winning in this potential matchup. I just think this team is not built to compete on the road at that high level. They are a very talented roster. That's certainly no joke. They're 6-3 on the road so far this season, while 6-2 at home as well. Got a plus 157 point differential, won 4 in a row right now. 21.9 points against per game, 9th in the nation. Obviously, Lamar lights up the stat sheet, but I really don't know if Lamar is accustomed and ready to go in this playoff matchup. They lost a bad loss on the road at the Browns earlier in the year. They also lost the Steelers on the road. It was not a phenomenal loss when you look at all things considered. They lost the Eagles, the Chiefs, and the Raiders. Also losing the Raiders at home. That's kind of fluky in September, but still not a good loss for this Ravens team. I just don't trust this team in playoffs. It feels like the offense freezes up, for lack of a better term. They just seem to kind of stall out in the postseason. I don't trust the defense either to keep them in games. I think they'll find a way to struggle against Buffalo, and I just think the Bills are playing with some unheard of mojo for the last couple of years as a team that I think has the best opportunity to get to the Super Bowl in recent memory, and Josh Allen is playing really good. The coaching has been phenomenal in Buffalo. I like what the offense and defense can do on both sides of the ball. I trust the Bills this playoffs.
Yeah, Ravens, they have a phenomenal pass rush. The Bills' defense isn't exactly much greater, but I certainly think they also have a very good defensive line, and they always play with assertive toughness, especially at home. This is a team that's always going to bring it to the fold. They always play with extra energy in that freezing cold weather. And, of course, focusing on Kansas City, we both have them losing in the conference championship game to the Buffalo Bills. We just spoke a lot about Buffalo. The time's got to come eventually, right, where they get the job done in the playoff. And this Kansas City team, it's been a defensive team for the last 2 years now. And I think the defense is probably not as good as it was last year. But this is still a very tough Kansas City team on the defensive side of the ball, led by Chris Jones, Nick Bolton, Leo Chenal at linebacker. These guys are phenomenal. Trent McDuffie's having a phenomenal year at corner. Guys like Justin Reed have been great at safety. I think this is a defense that's, pretty underrated. And a lot of people last year, that's all they wanted to talk about was Mahomes. And for the most part, I was like, this is a defensive team. I think finally people are starting to realize that, fourth in the league in scoring defense. The offense, that was the biggest concern, which is crazy to think with Mahomes at, the center of things. They've just not been as explosive or as consistent, Nick. It's been a big struggle all year long to get Travis Kelce involved. It hasn't been, as easy in years past where he just seems to be wide open with scheming. The run game hasn't been perfect. Pacheco getting hurt, Kareem Hunt. He's came in and filled in well, putting up, 728 and 7 touchdowns really over the back half of the year. But this team just doesn't seem to be all that good, Nick. Of course, Kelsey and Mahomes, though, these guys are magical and they get things done in the postseason. It's hard to bet against them. Noah Gray's been a really good tight end as well. DeAndre Hopkins coming over is really giving them a veteran big body to throw to. Then Xavier Worthy, he's really hit or miss on what he's going to do as a real speed guy. They just don't seem to have the same playmaking prowess that they've had in the past, Nick. And Mahomes has not been really making the greatest of plays either, of 11 interceptions, under 4,000 yards. Again, though, you can't bet against these guys. Everything that happened in the regular season, you can throw it out. But this team won so many games they should not have won. I mean, the Raiders literally dropped the snap to lose the game. I mean, it was almost like these are legitimately rigged games, Nick, is what it felt like. And then the next week, the Chargers lose because of a doinked field goal. Denver, they blocked a field goal in that one. Barely beat Tampa Bay in overtime. I mean, just every single week throughout the year, Nick, they've been skating by. And at some point, you're going to meet a team that's just not going to settle for that. And that's what happened when they lost to Buffalo, their only legitimate loss of the year. And I think that's going to come full circle when the Bills get the job done this time in the playoffs.
It feels like the luck has to run out. It just has to happen at some point. The magic has to run out. This team's just been flirting with it for too long. You rattled off so many examples there. It's hard to believe that they could keep getting away with this. I think you have to look at the defense and highlight, great drafting by this front office that's been able to get guys in the late first round, mid-second round, and really turn them into productive players. Trent McDuffie, a recent draft pick that's been really good. George Karlaftis has been solid for this team with 8 sacks and 9 tackles for loss. Felix Uzama has been really good in rotational depth with 27 total tackles and 6 tackles for loss. All guys that we loved in college at this Chiefs team. These guys sort of just fell to them. They plugged them in. McDuffie, I absolutely love watching him play. 6 tackles for loss for him. 13 pass breakups, 2 picks. He's just been phenomenal, right? He's been a really good cornerback for this team, playing really good in coverage. When I look at this offense, I do get a little skittish and worried about it as well. They don't have a 1,000-yard receiver this year. Travis Kelce's their highest receiver with 823 yards, only averaging 8.5 yards per catch and 3 touchdowns. Just not his same self. Obviously, he's an older player. I certainly give him a mulligan there. Kelsey's been at it for a while. Worthy didn't break 1,000 yards. Didn't really get close at 630 on the year and 6 touchdowns. No double-digit touchdown receptions either for any of this team. Noah Gray has been quietly surprising, but they've really spread the ball out. They've just not been as effective in the red zone as they have been in previous years. Mahomes, the 11 touchdowns, is a little uncharacteristic for him. A bit sloppy at times this year. Kind of odd when you look at it for a Kansas City Chiefs team. At the end of the day, this is still a great roster, right? There's no hiding that. This is a phenomenal team, but it just feels like at some point the magic has to come to an end, and I just don't think they're in a great position to go 3 in a row right now. I just don't think they have enough stamina. A lot of those games, it adds up on your body, that toll that your body takes over and over again. Hit after hit will certainly add up for some of those older players on the roster. I think this is the year that the Bills have to get it done.
Yeah, and I think for Kansas City, people try to say, great teams win close games. That's true, but a lot of these are just pure luck at the end of the day. It's not just them being great and knowing how to close out games. Again, I just think it's pure luck, quite frankly. Not being haters at all, that's just kind of how we see it. Moving to the NFC, much more interesting is I think all these teams have a legitimate shot of making a good run, potentially winning a ring. Of course, we'll start with Detroit, the number 1 seed. This is a team that's been ravaged by injuries. On offense, they're still looking good, though. Jameer Gibbs is a full-time back, coming off 4 touchdowns against Minnesota. Mondra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jamison Williams. I mean, that's a nasty trio. Jared Goff. When he first got traded to Detroit, a lot of mock draft websites had QB as a need for Detroit, and I was like, you guys are foolish. Build around this guy. He's a winner, and he's a good quarterback, and look what he's doing. So happy that Jared Goff has put all that nonsense to bed, and here he is as the number 1 seed in the NFC. Great offense. I thought that they had a great building block to begin with a phenomenal offensive line, and they've really stayed intact for the most part, led by Penei Sewell. Phenomenal O-line for the Lions, and that's why they've been so successful on offense. If you're going to beat this team, it's probably going to have to be in a shootout, which really favors into your chances. This is a defense that has been hobbled badly by injuries, and they were getting throttled for a couple of weeks on this side of the ball. Of course, in the season finale against Minnesota, they held them in check. But Minnesota had a lot of opportunities. They were in the red zone numerous times. Bad play calling, poor play at quarterback really allowed them to hold Minnesota kind of in check. Darnold was missing a lot of throws. I think I heard earlier he had like 8 overthrows in the first half. I mean, it was ridiculous, right? So they were able to beat the hell out of Minnesota 31-9. But this defense is still very questionable, Nick, because of all these injuries. I know they still have some guys out there ball-hawking players in the secondary. Kirby Joseph of 9 interceptions. Brian Branch going to the Pro Bowl. Terrion Arnold, they were going to do x-rays on him. Looks like he should be good to go. Alex Anzalone put on a clinic coming back from injury against Minnesota. Meek Robertson as well. So it's kind of been by committee, guys stepping up this as of late, Nick, that really hadn't been all that great throughout the year. And of course, Jack Campbell in the middle has been a great linebacker for them. How do you think that this defense will fare? Obviously, you have them winning the Super Bowl, but right now, this defense is in complete peril. I know they looked good yesterday against Aaron Glenn dialed up some masterpieces against Minnesota. That's not going to be the case throughout these playoffs, though. You're going to get everyone's best punch.
Yeah, I'm all in on the Lions, and I am concerned about the defense. This is a team that's playing phenomenal football, 15-2. Oddly enough, they're 7-2 at home and 8-0 on the road. Kind of funny when you look at it that way, that their 2 losses came at home compared to traveling on the road. They're going to have home field advantage throughout the entire rest of the playoffs. So kind of a funny way. They lost to the Bucs early in the season, and it was a close contest, and they lost an absolute masterclass shootout against the Bills just a couple weeks ago, which was a phenomenal game. This is a team that's a plus 222 point differential. They're playing really good football, 11-1 in the NFC, 6-0 in their own division, including capping it off against the Vikings on Sunday Night Football to clinch the 1 seed and the division crown. I felt really good about the Lions going into that game. They won that game. They knocked off Minnesota, a team that was playing with some good mojo, and they put themselves in this position. I think this defense, they brought the right pieces back. Terrion Arnold's been phenomenal for this team. The pass rush has been really good for this team. They've been getting a lot of sacks. They've been putting a lot of pressure. I think, the defensive coordinator is an absolute phenomenal play caller, like you alluded to there, a guy that's really good. They're 7th in the league in points against, 20.1 points per game. They play really strong physical football. I like what this defense can do, and I think this offense led by Jared Goff has been phenomenal. A really good plethora of talent there. Gives Montgomery a really great 1-2 punch on the ground. Goff himself is really solid. Williams, St. Brown, Laporta, all really good. Tim Patrick's quietly having a good season. Jahmyr Gibbs has been really good as a receiving back as well with 4 receiving touchdowns. Jack Campbell's plugged in at linebacker, 131 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss for him. Really impressive numbers there. Brian Branch, another Alabama player with Terrion Arnold, has been really good. I think this is a phenomenal defense that's getting healthy. Of course, obviously we have to keep an eye on Arnold's health, but they're getting healthy. This is a defense that's rounding into form. I think they have a great lineup here. They're playing at home through the rest of the playoffs. It's a team that really feels like a team of destiny as well. The Lions, our entire lives and most people's lives, this team has been horrible, right? Bad ownership, bad coaches, bad players, whatever you want to call it. They went 0-16 once. Just a horrible franchise that had no success. They got to the playoffs last year, made a run to the NFC title game. Now they're in prime position to make another run to the NFC title game. This team is playing really good football. They look really good right now. I think they're in a great spot, and I like what this team can do. I think they're a really solid roster, a great offense, great defense, and phenomenal coaching, including both play callers who are incredible and most likely going to take head coaching jobs once this is all said and done. I like what this Lions roster can do. I like them going all the way.
Now we look at the team that they lost, the Minnesota Vikings and the LA Rams. Very intriguing matchup, probably the best matchup on the wild card weekend. Rams played the Vikings earlier in the year, beat them 30-20 back in October. That was the last loss they had until the game against Detroit just yesterday. This Minnesota team, they've been good, right? But if you look at their resume and you've watched them weekly, they've just skated by as well, it seems like. The game against Chicago, the first one, their defense was getting ravaged. I was at the game against Jacksonville. They were horrendous in the red zone. They couldn't score a touchdown against that defense. They were putting yards on. Darnold had a lot of mistakes. And as a USC guy, Nick, Rex Ryan, he said it on Sunday Countdown a couple of weeks ago. They're like, you think he's good enough to take him through the playoffs? He said, no. He kept it quite frank, and I'm probably going to keep it honest too. Right now, it just doesn't seem like he's there. This guy's holding the ball way too long, taking sacks. Was awful. Last night against the Lions, Nick, was so much on the line. He completed like 18 of 41 or something like that. The run game is respectable of Aaron Jones, nothing crazy. And, of course, Brian Flores has been dealing up with incredible defense. They're so fun to watch on defense. They're incredibly tough to crack. They got gashed against Jahmyr Gibbs in the run last night. And, of course, that hasn't been the theme throughout the year. This team just seems to be leaving a lot on the table. I know Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, these guys are going to be hard to defend, especially for the Rams, whose defense hasn't been incredible this year. But I think the Rams are a big sleeper. I think they're undervalued. Again, they've really had the Lions' number, I'd say, as of late, even though they've lost those games last year. I can't remember what it was. I just remember after watching the wild card game in Detroit saying they should have won that game. And they went to overtime with them in week 1, and then they beat Minnesota. They can play with the top dogs, Nick. Matt Stafford, this guy is one of the best in the business, even at his older age. 2 elite receivers in Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. They also have 2 other guys with over 500 yards who've really stepped up while those top 2 are injured. Kyron Williams provides balance at 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns. And again, the defense is a concern for the Rams as well, but I think they have enough pieces up front on defense, led by guys like Jared Verse, a great rookie for them. What was his name? Kobe Durant at corner, and Darius Williams, Akil Witherspoon. It's really going to be up to these guys to see how they cover because they've not been great throughout the year. But I think guys like Verse and Byron Young up front can provide a lot, Nick, and I think that's going to be a big difference maker. Kobe Turner as well. I think they have enough run-stopping prowess to be able to win throughout the playoffs. Michael Hoyt as well. His pass rush is kind of iffy, but I think the Rams can make a bit of a run. They're not scared of these teams, and they have a great offense.
I love what this Rams can do. I think when you look at the NFC side of the bracket, I feel like all three games are extremely intriguing on Wild Card Weekend, whereas the games in the AFC bracket are not as intriguing. You and I both discussed this last night when the schedule first came out, that we love what the NFC bracket has. I think all three matchups are really interesting. It felt like last night the loser of the Minnesota Lions game was going to be dealt a tough draw against the Rams, and I felt that the Rams were good value against either the Lions or the Vikings. Quite frankly, this is a very talented Rams team. I'll get to it in a second. When I look at the Vikings, right, they have 3 losses here: 2 to the Lions, 1 to the Rams. Those are 2 teams they've struggled with. They've really, gotten bailed out in a couple of games. They got bailed out in the Seahawks game, the Packers game. They nearly blew it against the Packers earlier in the year on the road when they took a huge lead in that one. Struggled against the Bears on the road as well. Struggled against the Jaguars, some other teams that they struggled against with. Last night I think it was certainly a very important thing. We look at the red zone in the first half. They got down to got a great punt return to get them started at the 50-yard line. Got down to the red zone, turned the ball over on downs on 4th down. A bad play call led to them turning the ball over, and then the next drive they got an interception against Goff. Got all the way, set up a perfect field position. They were on the 1st and goal after that interception. 3 straight plays, nothing. Kicked a field goal, settled for 3 points. Had to settle for another field goal late in the half, right before time expired. There just couldn't cash in, could not get the touchdown that they needed. They struggled throughout that night, and that was certainly telling to me as I watched that entire matchup. I think the Rams are playing really good football right now, and this is a team that I think is really hot. Of course, Sean McVay is a phenomenal coach. This is a guy that's been there before, won a Super Bowl with this team. They were playing incredible football prior to the game against the Seahawks. They had won 5 in a row. They were looking really hot. They beat some bad teams, yes, but they beat some important matchups. They beat the Bills in that shootout in LA, which was a massive win for them as well. They looked good against the Saints, looked good against the Niners and the Jets, even if they, barely escaped in terms of score. They were better than the Jets, right? The cold weather certainly played a factor into that. This is an offense with Matthew Stafford that's really looking solid. Puka Nacua is obviously playing a really strong year. The stats don't look great, right? They're average 20th in points for, 17th in points against, but you just like the coach and you trust McVay in this situation. You trust this roster, and this is a team that's got out of the NFC West. They won the division. They ended up knocking out Seattle at the end of the day, who were 10-7 as well. They punched their ticket to the playoffs as a team that I think plays really solid, both home and away. They're about same records in both setups here. I just don't trust Sam Darnold in the playoffs. I share my same sort of concern that you have. This Rams team feels good value to get a win in the first round.
Now we'll look at another intriguing matchup, a rematch of Week 1. Tampa Bay beat Washington. Kind of irrelevant at this point, quite frankly. Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, Brian Robinson, a 3-headed monster on offense. It's been great, right? And I think it's been a fun story to watch this year. This team's also kind of had some of their close contests. A lot of wins that have come by a couple of points. The last 4 have all come by 6 points or less. They had a couple of close losses as well against good teams like Pittsburgh, Philly. They did lose to a Cooper Rush-led Dallas team. And I think that's the biggest concern of Washington. I'll just kind of keep it short and sweet on them. Daniel's been great this year. It's a rookie quarterback going up against the Todd Bowles defense. It's been iffy at times this year. Washington's own defense, they're not good against the run, 3rd worst. The pass defense, a little bit better on the stat sheet. These corners haven't been good. Mikey Sanders, still the rookie, has been playing well, but not as good in coverage. Benjamin St. Juste, this guy is pretty abysmal. They're hoping Marshawn Lattimore, I guess, can get healthy and get on the field. I really don't know at this point what kind of impact he'd be able to make, though. The secondary is just not all that great. Jeremy Chin is good, of course. Bobby Wagner's a great leader to have. He's having a monster season. Frankie Lavu as well. And, of course, Dante Fowler having a resurgent season out of nowhere as a pass rusher. I just don't think this defense is going to be good enough, Nick. And, again, against Cooper Rush and company, they were getting dusted against Dallas back in November. In the last couple of weeks, it's not been great. They probably should have lost to Philly, which was led by a Kenny Pickett, led offense. They barely escaped a victory against Michael Penix. This is just not a really impressive resume as of late. I know they've won 5 in a row. It's great momentum. But Baker Mayfield and his weapons, especially the run game with Bucky Irving, Rashad White, Mike Evans, who's been doing it for a long time, catching passes, just seems like a prime opportunity for Tampa to get a pretty big win here in advance.
I like what this Washington team can do. I disagree with a little bit here. I think this Washington team is solid. Jaden Daniels, his first career start was against Tampa. 17 of 24 for 184, plus 16 on carries on the ground for 88 yards and 2 scores. I think that was a really good moment for that showed, hey, there's a lot of promise with this Commanders team, and they've played good football. They've shaken off some of their woes at points in the season. Yes, they lost 3 in a row to Steelers, Eagles, and Cowboys, but they won 5 in a row as of late. They beat the Eagles again. I know Pickett was leading them, but still, they beat the Falcons, who were fighting for a playoff spot, and they ended up beating the Cowboys to round off the season when the Cowboys had nothing to play for. I think this is a good Commanders team. This is an offense that I think is really fun to watch. 28.5 points per game, 5th in the league, 3rd in the league in rushing, 154 yards. They have good balance on the ground with Jaden Daniels leading the way with about 900 yards and 6 rushing touchdowns for him. He's been really solid leading the way. Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler have been solid backs complimenting him. Robinson 800 yards and 8 touchdowns for him. I think he's a really solid back that you can rely on here. The Bucs, they get out of a bad division, right? They end up winning the NFC South, which was really a bad division this year. They lost 2 games in division as well. No one else in their division had a positive point differential. The Buccaneers had 117 positive point differential. This is a team that's also playing good football as of late, right? They won 6 of their last 7, with their only loss being on the road to the Cowboys. They put up some dominating numbers against the Chargers, a playoff team. Looked good against the Panthers and Saints, 2 below average teams, as well as beat down on my lowly Giants, who are certainly searching for answers. The Bucs lost 4 in a row at one point as well, which I think is not forgotten. They got struggled against the Ravens, the Falcons, the Chiefs, and the Niners. 2 of those teams are not in the playoffs, which I think is certainly concerning as well. They lost the Falcons twice this year, a team that tried to backdoor their way into the playoffs, but just didn't get super lucky. I think Baker Mayfield's a great player. I think Todd Bowles is a really good coach as well. I think the defense is phenomenal. But I just like this mojo. I like the riding the wave here with the Commanders. This is a team that's playing great football. There's optimism in our nation's capital for the first time in a very long time when it comes to a Commanders football team. They're playing great football. I like the energy. I think they're going to go on the road here and get a nice upset win. I just like the vibes with them. I think they're a very talented team, and the offense will put up a lot of points and win, which should probably be a high-scoring affair in Tampa.
Yeah, and the pass defense isn't all that great for Tampa Bay either, but I agree with you. High-scoring affair. Wouldn't be shocked if it goes to Washington. I'll stick with Tampa Bay, though, at home. Looking at the final wild card matchup, Green Bay and Philly, another rematch from Week 1. Philly got the job done on the worst turf ever, so I don't really think it matters a whole lot. And I think for Green Bay, this is a team that's also kind of just been, winning games to win games. They haven't really been all that impressive. Pretty bad in their own division. What is it, 1-4? I mean, that's a pretty bad look. They've been winning a lot of close games against weaker football teams. I knew they blew out San Francisco earlier in the year. I don't really know if that's a big accomplishment. They beat a better down New Orleans team as well. I mean, this isn't that great. I think Geno Smith was out of the Seattle game. So, I mean, this is not a team with a whole lot of mojo, not a whole lot of confidence. 2 losses in a row by 2 points each in division. The passing attack has really not been all that great. I mean, the consistency has not really been there for much of the season with this passing attack. Jordan Love tends to get himself in a little bit of trouble. Some of his weapons haven't been producing like we expected. Jaden Reed hasn't been as good in the back half of the year. Christian Watson's now out with a torn ACL. Romeo Dobbs, he was out for the season finale. So you're really not sure you're going to get here. Dontavian Wicks, Tucker Kraft have been pretty good and reliable throughout the year. The passing attack's just not been impressive this year, going up against the top-ranked pass defense in the NFL. Great corners, rookie Quinyon Mitchell's been terrific. Darius Slay as well. Isaiah Rodgers has even been impressive when he's been on the field. Of course, Cooper DeJean in the slot has been very impressive. I mean, this is a team playing with a lot of juice in the back end. Of course, Reed Blankenship and C.J. Gardner-Johnson have been playmakers all year at safety, and they have an incredibly deep defensive line and a nice pass rush led by guys like Josh Sweat, Jalen Carter, and Nolan Smith. You got the Packers winning this game, Nick. I don't really see it. And of course, the Packers, they're hard to put down, right? They're kind of like the Chiefs. It's going to be an incredibly tough team to beat, especially because their defense is also really good. They just don't have the offense there, I think, to compete with Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley. Guys like A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith are going to play very good in the playoffs. Dallas Goedert is back and healthy. I mean, there's just too much juice here for the Eagles. I don't see how they can lose to the Packers, but it's an interesting thesis. Let's hear it.
Yeah, sure. I'll make the case here, right? I think this is a Packers defense that's really good. Yes, this team has been a little bit weak at times. They've just kind of limped their way in here. 1-5 in their own division, 3rd in division. Certainly, I think that's a fair assessment. And, Christian Watson's injury does change things a little bit. But I like what this defense is do. Egerton Cooper was drafted in the 2nd round by this team. He's plugged in at linebacker and been phenomenal. Cooper's been really dominant. The A&M product. This defense is really good, 19.9 points against, 6th in the nation. They're also really solid at running the ball. I will certainly get to that in a second. I like what this defense can do. I think this is a defense that's playing really solid football against the pass and against the run. I think they have really good linebackers. Quay Walker, Isaiah McDuffie leading the way for this team. Each of them have about 100 tackles. Really good numbers there. Xavier McKinney coming over from the Giants, 8 interceptions. He's been ball hawking, 11 pass breakups, 88 total tackles for him. I think he's been really good. Kingsley and Gabargier on the defensive line as well has been really solid for this team. Evan Williams, safety, has been leading this team as well as a really good coverage asset. I like what this team do. Lucas Van Ness. I can go on and on. This is a defense that I absolutely love. I think it's a defense with a lot of talented pieces that is playing really good football right now, that is kind of getting overshadowed by the offensive struggles. I think that's certainly something that is important to look at. 27.1 points per game is really solid for this offense. They are very good at running the ball as well. They're a top 5 unit in the league at running the ball. I think that starts with Josh Jacobs, who's been really good for this team as a free agent, signing 1,300 yards rushing, 15 touchdowns, 78 yards per game. He's been really good leading the way. What type of love are you going to get? Are you going to get the consistent love that's really dominant and really accurate, like we saw in the game against the Saints when they blew them out? Or are you going to get the love that turns the ball over sloppy and has a bad day? 11 picks on the season is concerning, but 25 touchdowns for him as well through the air. I just don't really trust the Philadelphia coaching. I still think the coaching is a little overrated in Philadelphia. Yes, this team's 14-3, but I think there's some issues with this team on offense at times. They're a solid unit, but they can't really throw the ball effectively. 187 yards per game through the air, 29th in the league. Yes, they run the ball very effectively with Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts, but I like the run defense as well for Green Bay. I just have a good feeling about Green Bay here. I can't really exactly put my finger on it. I just think Philly's due for a letdown at some point, even though they had a letdown last postseason. I think this team is just a little shaky at times, and I like what Green Bay can do running the ball. I think they grind down the clock a little bit and win this matchup on the road.
Yeah, the two Alabama free agent acquisitions and Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney have been great. McKinney with 8 interceptions, Jacobs of nearly 1,400 yards rushing and 15 scores. So they're going to be tough to put down. That concludes Nick's bracket. We'll just quickly touch on mine, as we already discussed all these matchups. And obviously, you'll see here, Nick, mine doesn't look like the rest. And, I think that's fine, even though sports over the last 2 to 3 years has been straight chalk, right? Every single favorite has been winning these titles. Will that change? Probably not, but I think the Rams are incredibly undervalued. And before I sound like a madman, the year they won it a couple seasons ago, I picked them to win it in the preseason, which was, I was probably the only one that did that. And before the playoffs that year, I picked the Bengals in a new bracket to meet them in the Super Bowl, and it ended up being correct. So I'm not that far out of touch, Nick. I know it might seem like that because we're a college football page. I think the Rams are incredibly underrated. Stafford, I alluded to earlier, a veteran quarterback who was very tough to get out. They just outlasted Buffalo in a shootout a couple weeks ago. This is a team that's really been staggered on offense the last couple of victories, but that's allowed their defense to really show up and prove some muscle, winning a couple of low-scoring games since they beat Buffalo. I really like what they bring to the table, and I think they have enough on defense to be competitive and not get completely diced up. While you don't want to play this team on offense, Nick, especially in the playoffs, again, they beat Minnesota earlier this year. The Lions have not been really a problem for them, and even though home field advantage is great, I always say when you're in a dome, that can be loud, but the conditions are very even for everybody playing in a dome, more so than playing at Lambeau Field, for example, right? So I certainly think that kind of plays into the Rams' favor as well. It's not the greatest of home field advantages. I also have them playing Buffalo in the Super Bowl, topping Kansas City in the AFC title game. I think the Chargers can certainly beat Kansas City. That'd be impressive to watch. We're pretty much on par in the AFC, Nick. A lot of discrepancies, though, in the NFC by far. That includes the Rams and the Eagles meeting in the conference title game.
Yeah, again, that's why I think the NFC has the more intriguing brackets. You and I went the same way on the AFC side, but our NFC is wildly different. I think the matchups in the NFC bode well for potential more upsets. There's a lot more variability, it feels like, in the NFC, and the NFC seems like the conference that will produce a champion this year. I like what the NFC has. Just seems like a wide-open conference, certainly a more intriguing playoff battle where the AFC kind of feels weak and sort of set in stone. We'll see how it ends up. Obviously, you got to play these games, so this is just a matchup discussion on paper, but it feels like the NFC has more opportunity for crazy upsets and more variability, whereas you look at the AFC, it looks like you're going to probably get those 4 teams that we picked to get to the finals, to the Final Four. Potentially Houston knocks off the Chargers, but I really think it's going to be Baltimore, Buffalo on that bottom side, and then KC will beat whoever they get in their first matchup of the playoffs. The NFC is extremely intriguing, and I'm really excited to watch that all go down this upcoming weekend.
Now, it seems pretty unlikely that the Rams would beat Minnesota, Detroit, and Philly 3 straight weeks. I mean, that's a hellacious run there. To be the best, you got to beat the best, though, Nick. And even though it's season, it's almost like a 5% chance of that happens. This is still the pros in the NFL, and this is Stafford who has seen everything. And again, it's going to be tough for these people or these teams to guard them, especially with Detroit, who's got a pretty ravaged defense. And, Philly's got a really good one as well. There's going to be tough matchups across the board, but again, I'm going to stick with the Rams as an underdog. I might end up looking foolish come Monday night. But I like what this team brings to the table on offense, and I think McVay is an incredibly underrated coach, and the Rams are undervalued at like plus 4,000. So that's what I'm going to stick with. I think they can get the job done. I think this will be ultimately a good NFL playoffs, Nick. If it does just end up being all chalk and 2 1 seeds meet, whatever, I guess, right? No one really wants to see that, but I think all of us would be rooting for the Lions over the Chiefs. I'm rooting for entertaining playoffs, though, and a little bit of difference compared to the last couple seasons.
Yeah, I'm rooting for some entertaining, some really good games going down. I like what I've seen out of the NFL so far this season. Been a bit of a crazier year on the NFC side. Certainly the AFC's been also interesting as well. This is a good playoff draw. I think this is a fun matchup. Even though I kind of trashed the AFC, there are still some good, intriguing matchups like the Chargers and Houston 1 kicking off on Wild Card Weekend. Would be a miracle run from the Rams, and we've seen miracle runs before, like the Giants in 2007. So if anything could certainly happen. At the end of the day, these are pros going against pros, so you really can't count anybody out. I like the potential for the Rams here. They're a very talented team. I like Detroit to win it all, though. I'm excited for these NFL playoffs. I think this is a really good bracket and a lot of fun stuff going down.
Yeah, I mean, the Eagles a couple years ago when Nick Foles had a pretty incredible run, and then the Rams a few years ago when they won it, they had to go beat Tom Brady, what was it, on the road. So, I mean, that was a pretty hellacious run as well. So it's certainly possible. This is the pros, and this should be fun. Now, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.